Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Impact 100's EqualiTea. Today is Women's Equality Day, and we are very excited to have a girl power panelist and lineup of speakers to talk to us today to learn more about women's equality and to talk about the power of women's vote. I am very excited. Hopefully we can get in there and turn on the Attorney General Dana Nessel's camera to really have an opportunity to speak to one of our female leaders. We live in a state that has an incredible number of women at our top executive levels. And because of that, we have a great opportunity to allow them to hear their perspectives on both the 19th Amendment, as well as how we as women can become more involved and more active. Again, my name is Kelly Walsh. I am the president-elect of Impact 100 Metro Detroit, and consider me your cruise director today. I get to ask all the fun questions that many of you submitted already, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat to see if there's any that might be aligned. But good morning, welcome Attorney General Nessel. We are so excited to have you with us today. For those of you that don't know, Attorney General Nessel is our 54th Attorney General. He is from the Metro Detroit area, having a graduate of Michigan State as well as Wayne State, and has done an incredible, really built her career on civil rights, on helping individuals, helping marginalized individuals. So we're really excited to have your perspectives and hear your opinions, Attorney General. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Kelly. I love everything you said, except for I'm a proud Michigan graduate, so I'm a Wolverine. That's why the governor and I sometimes go at it a little bit on game day. But
well,
I'm not going to be offended that you called me a Spartan. I'm just going to correct you.
I apologize. Well, I'm from Columbus, so hopefully we're not off to a good start yet.
We got a lot more to talk about then, lady. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Well, so, I'd love for us to just kind of dive in. We get you for just a few moments. We're so incredibly proud to have you in this conversation. So I just want to kind of dive in. So today is, again, Women's Equality Day, celebrating when the 19th Amendment was signed into law. And I'm curious what your perspective of the 19th Amendment is, both as an Attorney General and as a woman. And maybe even if, for those of us who it's been a hot minute since we were in civil and, in history class and civics class, your lens of how the Attorney General's office impacts women and what your office is doing with women.
Well, how much time do you got for me?
I know, right? I packed in an hour of conversation.
All right, because we got a lot going on at my office. I just want to say this, though, because I want to start off a little bit talking about how I became Attorney General, sort of famously in some circles, in regard to sort of pushing back at the notion that we couldn't have too many women in office. And that was a big part of my campaign. And as you might know, in the Democratic Party, we don't have primaries for a number of our offices, our down ballot offices. And that includes Attorney General and Secretary of State, and also our Supreme Court races. And so just from the very beginning, for me, when it became very clear to people that Gretchen Whitmer was likely to be our nominee for governor and that Jocelyn Benson was likely to be our nominee for Secretary of State, there was a lot of pressure put on individuals in the Democratic Party who would be voting at the convention not to vote for me, not to support me, only because they thought that the state of Michigan would never, ever elect 3 women to their chief executive offices. And I had to fight back vigorously against that theory, so much so that when the Me Too movement really started to come into being, and day after day after day, we were hearing some really egregious stories of sexual harassment, sexual assault, and sexual misconduct by people at all levels of government, and not just government, whether it was in Hollywood, whether it was in journalism, that I really had to be very strong about saying, maybe we wouldn't have this problem if we had more women at the top levels of government or business or journalism or what have you. And I really had to work hard to get women engaged to come out to support my candidacy, because of this notion that the state would never tolerate this. We would never be okay with that many women in office, which of course was something that was horrifying to me because in 2014, the Democrats had an all-male ticket, and I didn't hear anybody say anything about that. And I had said over and over again that really our best chances of becoming elected is if we had more women that were on the ticket. And lo and behold, we all now have titles as, executive office holders in this state. And they were wrong about that because people were ready to have women as leaders at all levels of government. But that was 2018, that wasn't 100 years ago. That was just a couple years ago that we had to have that fight and prove people wrong that it was okay to have women leaders in this state. So I just want to remind people that sometimes it feels like we've come a long way, and sometimes it feels like we have so far to go. But that's just a little story about me sort of even getting the opportunity to be on people's ballot in the general election in 2018. It was a real fight based solely on that issue. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm kind of curious about that. So we had 300 women register for this, which was absolutely incredible. And I think part of it is we're curious of both having female executives in Michigan, but also how do we get more women to understand their power and either run for office, step up to leadership? And maybe what gave you that nudge, or if you're talking to a woman who's maybe thinking she's trying to find her voice in that type of leadership space, how could someone go about doing that?
Well, first of all, of course, I think it's really important for women to support women. And we now have a lot of women that are elected leaders in our state, both at the state level, obviously, and also at the federal level, and at local levels all around the state. But I think it's important to have programs, which really do exist, where women support other women and help other women. And I have to tell you, I really push back against the old stereotype that somehow women don't get along with each other when they're in positions of leadership. I'm really proud that every week I am working with Secretary Benson and Governor Whitmer and all the women that are members of our congressional delegation in the United States Senate, and then of course in the State House and the State Senate. So, it's just simply not true, but also it's organizing as women. And there are a number of women's political groups that have sprung up, honestly, just since 2016 that never existed before, that were hugely impactful in terms of getting me into office. And they really organized. And these were folks that I think previously, maybe they were regular voters, but they weren't organizers. And I think many of us who, we're busy, right? Many of us have jobs outside the home. We're raising young children. We got a lot going on, and it feels overwhelming to also have to put aside a chunk of our time in order to become politically active. But I think what we've grown to realize in recent years is this isn't an option for us. If we want to not just advance in terms of the rights that women have and the protections that women have, but just even to keep the rights that we have right now, we have to be properly represented. And of course, famously, as Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you pull up a folding chair. And that's what a lot of women have done lately. And I will say, I know for me, specifically, I never ever could have, 2018 was the first time I ever ran for political office. Really had never imagined it at all before 2016, but I had gotten so tired of whether it was our state government or whether it was our federal government. I would routinely see a group of exclusively men, and usually they were, pretty monolithic, white, older men that would be around a table discussing women's issues or issues that were particularly of great salience or interest to women, you know, and whether that was healthcare or childcare issues, whether it had to do with reproductive rights, I would see exclusively men talking about issues that I think had the greatest impact sometimes on women. And I would always say, like, where the heck are all the women to chime in on this? If we don't have a woman's perspective on this, you know, how are you ever going to create good legislation? And it was just a matter of knowing that we had to get more female voices in the room to be part of those discussions and part of those policy making decisions. But I will say, I mean, the new organizations that came into being just in the last 4 years, I mean, so many women that will tell you, I was never involved before in my life. Yes, maybe every couple of years I went to the polls and I voted, but that was it for me. And now that's how I spend much of my free time as a political organizer, getting people to understand those who are running for office and be educated about those people and maybe host events where those people speak, and then ensuring that people get out and actually vote.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, you know, it's interesting personally, that completely resonates with me. I would never say I was a political organizer, but in the past several years, I've always voted, but now I'm really understanding that my civic responsibility is not only to vote, but to ensure that others have accessible and have the rights to vote and that they're not being suppressed in their vote. And if we can take a moment, you mentioned representation, and we know representation matters. And I'm curious how, being a female and attorney general, and I looked in the history of Michigan, and we've had very few attorney generals that were female.
I'm the second.
I would say second, right? Just Jennifer, Governor Granholm was the others. How do you think that you bring a different lens, and what has your office tackled even just in the past 2 years that maybe hadn't been thought of or looked at in the past?
Okay, well, firstly, I think it's important, you know, just as I said that in government in general, we need to have better representation. I felt like just in my office, my department, it was important to have more women in leadership positions. And I have to say, I was a bit startled and taken aback during the transition from General Schuette's administration to mine, when I first got to know really everyone in the office and who held what position and so forth. I was sort of shocked to see that when I came in, I think there were 26 divisions in my office, and there were just a handful of women that were division chiefs out of all the division chiefs. And again, it was almost all men, and entirely, with one exception, white men who held those positions. And that was so strange to me because I was used to practicing in a field where we know that more women graduate from law school than men. So how you end up with so many women who were in positions of authority in the office was very startling to me. And I will say that my last experience of government was working for Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy, and I can assure you that was not the case in her office. So, you know, it was a matter of course, respecting the great work of the men that were in those positions, but making certain that women who earned it and who deserved it had an opportunity to compete for those positions. And I brought in many, many more division chiefs that are female in the office now. And that in addition to that, my Solicitor General, who's the top appellate attorney in the state, is a woman. She's actually the first Muslim woman in the United States ever to hold that position. Actually the majority of my executive staff, my director of communications, my chief of operations, a number of other top positions in my office are women. And so I think there is frankly better collaboration now that things are a little bit more equal just in the office and the way it's run. And I think it's a different perspective on the way it's run too. But in addition to that, it's the cases that we are bringing, and in some instances, the cases that we are not bringing. So, you know, I'm a big proponent of reproductive freedom. I ran on that. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. And so one of the things I did was to leave cases that had been joined by my predecessor that were antithetical to reproductive rights, but join on to a number of different cases that involved things like, contraception rights, abortion rights, and we have just case after case after case that we joined onto involving the ability for women to maintain the rights that they currently have in the United States that I think are eroding. A lot of these cases also had to do with things like equal pay, and even in supporting the ACA, the fact that we now have the ability to have free, OBGYN, annuals and things of that nature that were never the case before. And the fight to ensure that birth control is covered, which is something that was not true before the ACA, and that you insurance companies that refuse to allow for that to be covered, even though there are so many people, obviously, that not just use that as a method of birth control, but of course, birth control is prescribed for a litany of different reasons, those medications that deal with reproductive health, and that, these are lawsuits seeking to ensure that insurance companies don't cover that. But in addition, I've been a big proponent of ensuring that we once again ensure that the Violence Against Women Act, VOCA, is reauthorized. Which I'm going to be honest, I'm horrified that currently we don't have a majority in both chambers of Congress that think it's important to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. It's been quite some time that we recognize, how devastating domestic violence is all across the nation. And, all of these measures were put in place to enhance the ability to investigate and to prosecute and to provide services for women who had been the victims of domestic violence. I can't even believe that this is an act that has been allowed to lapse. And I'm quite horrified. And I don't understand why this is a partisan issue. I just don't. Protecting women from being subjected to domestic violence should be something that everyone, irrespective of their party, supports. I will say in July, I filed an amicus brief in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia in a case involving the Equal Rights Amendment, and that brief, supports the ratification of the ERA as the 28th Amendment, declaring, once and for all, the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. I can't believe it's 2020 and we are still arguing about this issue. So these are a number of examples of things that I've done in the office. I can really I could go on because the list goes on for a very long time, but it's very, very crucial to me that at all times women are protected under the law, and that there is equal protection for everyone, irrespective of sex or gender.
Amen. Thank you. So we have 2 minutes left before we need to move on to our next speaker. And what I'm most interested in is on today, the 100th anniversary. What is a piece of wisdom or a point of action that you would recommend to all of the women on this call as we go on to our day?
Well, honestly, the most important thing that I can say is, and again, this is irrespective of whatever your partisan leanings are, again, just becoming involved, and if that means nothing more than voting, ensuring that each and every election cycle, you make an effort to become aware of who the candidates are that are on the ballot, or the proposals that are on there, if there are ballot proposals. Become educated, take the time. It's so easy with the internet now too, right? To become educated on that and to make sure you vote and to encourage other people to do the same. But also, especially for 2020, to make certain that you understand how to properly vote. Unfortunately, there's so much misinformation out there, and of course I'm grateful to have Secretary Benson, who I know elaborate on this and explain this further. But, but we're working together right now on projects to ensure that there is proper education. This is the first time in Michigan history that we have no reason absentee voting in this state. And it could not come at a more important time than during the course of this global pandemic. But I would say this, if you feel as though your health will allow for it, to volunteer to be a poll worker. We need poll workers more now than ever before. If not, that you educate yourself on exactly the correct way to vote, whether you are voting at the polls or whether you're voting absentee. And that means when to have your ballot filled out, how to get your ballot delivered to your local clerk, and the timeliness of that. And I don't have much time to talk about it, but I'm currently suing the United States Postal Service because of delays in service that I fear are an effort at voter suppression to delay the vote and to ensure that many people's votes cannot count. So please educate yourself on that. And to ensure that everybody understands the best way to vote and that you absolutely cast your ballot for the November election. There can be nothing more important that I think I can possibly talk about than for people to understand the correct way to vote and then to ensure that you actually do it.
I wish we had 5 more hours to sit and talk to you. And I'm incredibly grateful that you were able to give us the time that you did. Thank you very much for serving the women of Michigan. Thank you for serving the citizens of Michigan, and for being a leader within not only the Attorney General's, but just a leader in our country. So have a lovely day. I speak for everyone that we really appreciate your words of wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. And, let's do this again sometime.
Definitely. We'll take you up on the offer.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Next, we're going to talk to, Attorney General mentioned that there were several organizations that popped up during and after the 2016 elections. And one of those is called Femmes for Change. It's a new women's organization that is a 501c3, not a nonpartisan civic engagement organization. And today we have Patricia Beatty, one of the leaders of that organization, that's going to just talk to us about both Femmes for Change, as well as some of the issues that Patricia has seen, but from a testimonial standpoint. You'll see a theme this morning is not only engaging and making sure that we are all voting, but helping us to think about how can we volunteer and how can we ensure that we're taking action to help others vote as well. So hopefully our hosts are finding Patricia to be able to turn on her camera and have her join us. Give it a moment. Patricia, if you're on, could you? I know she's on. She was texting me earlier. Well, while we find her, something that the Attorney General had mentioned was the Equal Rights Act, and the fact that it has not yet been ratified as an amendment. And this is something that personally, I'll have a vulnerable moment and share with you. I didn't realize that we as females still did not have the constitutional right that we didn't have rights in the Constitution. So something that I would encourage each of us to learn more about is the Equal Rights Amendment. There are many organizations right now that are helping women learn more and take action. There is a hope that regardless of what happens with this election, that women will rise and encourage the next president, as well as the next congressional leaders, to take that and ratify it and make it become. It has passed the 36 states, so now all we need is action at the federal level to make that happen. So Patricia, welcome.
Thank you.
It's so wonderful to see you. I gave you a little plug earlier, hopefully you heard it, but I'm going to turn it over to you to share with us about Femmes for Change. And,
it's interesting that right off the bat, it shows my name is Judy Robinson. And I'll just tell you, Judy Robinson's my partner on the voter registration part of Femmes for Change. And generally, I can change the name today it is not allowing me, and I'm assuming it's because of it's a webinar versus of Zoom. Thank you for inviting me. It's really exciting to be bookended by two of the most powerful women in Michigan right now. So I'll tell you a bit about Femmes for Change. My name is Patricia Beatty, and I'm a member, one of the founding members. And we're a group that is an organization of women and our allies that are engaged in community building, community education, engagement, leadership, all in a nonpartisan manner and all in a way to contribute to our society. Now, this is a lofty goal, but we're women and we've been advocating for people for years. We've been community building and we've been lifting everybody else up. We're good at this. We just have never given it a real title nor really acknowledged what we were doing, but this is the time to do it. Your organization does this. This is the time to step up, to own what we're doing, understanding and promote ourselves. So I'm really happy to join this group today. Femmes for Change, primarily the last year worked on voter registration. We have about 80 well-trained volunteers from 4 counties, and we registered nearly 10,000 voters last year. That's a lot of voters to do. And this didn't just happen overnight, and it wasn't an accident. It was accomplished by women that saw a need. They stepped up, we threw in our own money, we threw in our own time, we dragged in our friends and started this initiative for voter registration. It started when I saw an online ad to do voter registration. I went to the location and I was the only person who showed up to do voter registration. I know how to do it, I had forms, I did it, and then people came up and started asking me questions. And then the organizer said, "Can you get up and say a few words about voter registration?" I was terrified, but I really dig voting. So I got up and I talked and people were interested. I was completely hooked. I started going back. I started taking my friends, and 2 of the other women from Femmes for Change saw the need very quickly. And so while I'm out there recruiting volunteers and trying to make it a thing, they're back there developing protocols and figuring out a training method for the other women. And it just kind of morphed into a big thing. So it was a wonderful opportunity. But it isn't the only thing that Femmes for Change does. We have other members who have different interests. One of my friends really is into education, civic education. We're all a lot of years past high school, and she hired civics or professors of sociology and social sciences to conduct a series of like Civics 102 for us, a little higher level and specifically to cover the things that were in the news today. They were wonderful, really well attended. The Muslim Unity Center gave us space for it and was very kind about that because we really didn't have a lot of money as an organization. A lot of women, a lot of energy, a lot of interest. Another person in the group hired a constitutional law professor to put on a seminar just about the time of the impeachment. It was open to the public. We had such a great group and we were shocked at how many high school and college kids came. This was really interesting. We all learned a lot and we were all kind of in the know as things were unfolding. In every initiative we take, we strive to be nonpartisan. It doesn't mean that our members don't have views, they do. But when you're representing Femmes for Change, public facing, it's really important to remain nonpartisan. That's one of our big goals. We actually welcome anyone from Impact100 who'd like to join us. You can look at us on the website or find me there and reach out and see if there's something that interests you. If there's not, many of us have started new initiatives. Because of COVID-19, we can't go out and do the voter registration anymore. So we've gone to a non-contact form. I'm actually working with a group of 5,284 Michiganders who are low propensity voters who were hit very hard by the pandemic. So we're encouraging voting in a non-contact way. It's a little pricier, it's a little harder to manage, but I've got a team of 40 volunteers that are working on that full time over the next 3 weeks to get ballots to the applications to the right people. There's so many other nonpartisan activities that you can do. And from the comfort of your home and during a pandemic. So after today, I'll post 3 or 4 of them that are nonpartisan on the Femmes for Change website if you'd like to take a look at it. There's also a 15-minute video I posted, and thank goodness I was wearing a different shirt than I am today. I have a couple of traditional Zoom shirts, but it's a video on the election security of absentee ballots, and it's a deep dive, and it tells about the underpinnings of the system that make it a safe and secure place. So there's many ways to become involved in democracy. And I took the path of becoming a poll worker for several reasons. I trained in Bloomfield Hills and now I'm a poll worker in Detroit. So I want to give you a little perspective. And I had two great stories about poll workers that I wanted to share. I'm going to abbreviate them because I have just a few minutes. But my mom was a poll worker for 40 years in Scottsdale, Arizona, and she and a group of women ran those elections every year. The year my father retired, he decided to become an election worker too. When they arrived that morning, the chairperson, used to be called a chairman, the chairperson of the event of the precinct fell and broke her foot. So they called to Election Central and said, what do we do? Election Central went through the roster of employees or precinct employees, saw a man's name, put him in charge. He'd never worked an election. He knew nothing about it. He got paid more and he had seniority over everybody. That happened one time and one time only. At the end of the election that day, all the women who worked at the polls went down to the Election Central office and talked to him about it. Of course, the apologies were profuse and everybody was sorry and it shouldn't have happened, but they weren't done there. They went every future election they worked, they called up the Central Elections Department, they got a woman on the phone and they told her what happened. So we had 9 people calling 9 different women every single election. It was a common story in the town that no one would ever do that to a group of women again. And I really appreciate that they followed through when they needed to. My own experience as a poll worker in Bloomfield Hills, I showed up to work, and it's women that were a little bit older than me, very kind, very generous. Every question I had during the day, they would take me to the election manual and they would show me how to look at the answer. And I didn't really understand, but I saw them going to that manual 15, 20, 30 times a day. They were very focused on that manual. Great, I had a wonderful experience. I worked a couple of elections there. And then I went on and worked the Oakland County Recount, which was another exciting day. It wasn't until after the recount that I decided to switch to Detroit because they really needed poll workers, and I had great experience by that point. My precinct that I was assigned to is 4 precincts in the small gymnasium, basement gymnasium of a lower school in Detroit, a very working class neighborhood, probably lower income. But what I discovered on the first day is that those women in Bloomfield Hills had counterparts at each of the precincts in Detroit. These were experienced women that had been running the elections for years, and they pulled out that manual all day long and referred to it. It was the best training I could have possibly gotten. I worked with those women at my Detroit precinct a number of times. But when I arrived for the election on August 4th, it was a different story. I was the most senior person in the room, and I was terrified. Those women were gone. I think COVID-19 just brought it to a bunch of people that they were not going to take this risk anymore. So I walk in, I'm the most experienced person in the room. 2 of the workers were 16-year-old high schoolers who actually ended up being some of the best people I've ever worked with. They really got the program and they really followed the rules. And 3 people that had never worked an election before. But we worked together. I understood why we pull out the manual. I showed everyone else how to answer their questions by pulling out the manual. And I'm checking my time here to see where I am. Anyway, the PPE provided by Detroit Elections was wonderful. We had adequate masks, shields, hand sanitizer. We actually had those wipes that nobody can get their hands on, was disinfectant wipes, aplenty. So all 4 precincts, it was a slow election day, we wiped down every single voting booth after every single voter. And the people watched us do this and they thanked us and they liked it. I'm gonna take responsibility for that one. I'm a mom, I'm bossy as hell, and I wanted everyone to be safe, including me. So we did a great job on that. One of the things, what I will say, I actually had less physical contact working the election than I generally do when I go to a Costco grocery store, Costco run. So I appreciated that. And my friends that I'm always encouraging to work an election always ask me, do I feel safe working an election in Detroit? And when I say my friends, all of my friends ask this. Black, white, Muslim, Hispanic, everybody has the same concerns. And I'm going to tell you resoundingly, yes, I'm totally safe. I'm appreciated and I'm thanked. So I think it's a wonderful way, and I hope some of you will join that. I want to tell you.
All right, Patricia, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
we're done.
We're going to need to move on. But I am modeling the Vote 2020 Femmes for Change mask. So if you're interested in having one of those masks, I have many in my house. You go to the Femmes for Change website. It's a $20 donation. You hear that it's going to go to voter education. And then you also get on their mailing list. I received a call to action for the Postal Service last week. It was easy, I texted. So if you're looking for a place to help and to kind of just become more educated, get involved, particularly as it relates to voter engagement right now, I would highly suggest that you go to femmesforchange.org, get your Vote 2020 mask. Patricia, thank you for not only helping us. I told Patricia she was our cheerleader. She was the one that got to pump us up and get us ready to talk to Secretary Benson, who is wonderful. Thank you for joining us. Patricia, did you have a last word?
Can I? Yeah, it's really an important word, and I want to say it today because we're a group of women. Yes, women were given the opportunity to vote in 1920, but it really only applied to white women, and this matters. Native American women couldn't vote until 1947, Asian women in 1952, and Black women effectively in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act. So just because a law passes doesn't mean our work is done, and we need to work and help other women lift each other up. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Welcome.
Rock the mic, Patricia. Nice work. And actually, I think it leads us very well into Secretary Benson, who is our 43rd Secretary of State, another one of our power women that is part of the Michigan executive team that we are fortunate to have. So thank you so much for joining us. I know right now, like, you're in game time. You're countdown. It's crazy. I am so appreciative that you were able to join us today. And I'd like to just kind of hop off of what Patricia said. I know you have an incredible background in civil rights and that you literally wrote a book about secretaries of state and being tasked with the democracy. Let's just start with, we know that the 100th Amendment did not, while it constitutionally allowed all women to vote, it was not in reality for all women. How do you see voter suppression even today still playing? And how can we, as 200 women on this call, help to ensure that everyone's voice is heard and everyone has the opportunity to be heard at the ballots?
Well, thanks for having me. Great words, Patricia. Great to see and connect with all of you. And yeah, voter suppression is a evergreen issue in our democracy, whether it's an intentional effort to block someone from voting, or it's the impact of a number of decisions that make it more difficult or impossible for people to vote. Either intent or effect, suppression is real and leads to depressed turnout, particularly in historically disenfranchised communities, where we have to do even more to ensure the enfranchisement and full access to the vote of all of those citizens. And so that said, we've got a lot that we all can do to combat voter suppression, both in calling out policies and trying to change policies that have been historically or in current time limited people's access to the vote. But also this year, it really is taking on an additional urgency with so many new rules in place, a pandemic, in the as a reality for all of us, that essentially could also combine to suppress engagements, make it harder for people to vote or impossible for them to cast their ballot. Now, interestingly, what we've seen, we've had 3 elections so far this year in Michigan. And in our most recent August primary, this was underscored the most, but we've seen it in every election this year. People want to vote. Turnout records are being shattered in every election that we have. In our most recent August primary, 2.5 million citizens voted. And that was higher than ever before in an August primary in our state. And there were no contested statewide elections. So this was just people wanting to vote, even if the races they were voting on were uncontested or not close. So really extraordinary. We also saw 1.6 million, in other words, the majority of the people who voted, of the 2.5 million who voted by mail in that election. And that also indicates that people want to vote and they want to vote safely. Now, just under 1 million citizens voted in person on election day, which was also something we preserved and we fought to maintain safely and securely, providing our poll workers with masks and gloves and other PPE. But importantly, providing that option as well and enabling so many people to vote early or through the mail, enable us to have no crowds or lines on election day itself. which was, again, a model for how you run an election in the midst of a pandemic. You have an array of options that voters can take advantage of. Voters will choose what is most convenient for them. And that really is, the opposite of voter suppression. That's voter empowerment, voter accessibility. And the key thing I want to emphasize there with all of that, all those facts and data, is that what made all of that work wasn't me, wasn't our clerks, although of course we all do a significant amount of work making the infrastructure to ensure ballots are received and returned and counted, but it was voters who became fully educated on the issues and engaged themselves, chose the method of voting that was most accessible to them, and then cast their ballot accordingly. And importantly, it was voters themselves who enacted the ability to vote by mail into our state's constitution. So to me, the bottom line is the way to combat voter suppression is through voter engagement and through voters demanding a system that is accessible to them, is secure to them, and then becoming educated about all of the parts of the election administration and our democracy that go into ensuring votes can be cast and counted.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I have to say, I've done quite a bit of research in preparation for this morning. And for anyone who, you can go on to the Secretary's Twitter feed and her Instagram. And just recently you did like a 1-minute pitch about how the process goes through. And we'll include it in our follow-up for this, just so that everybody can really take a look. What I am particularly interested in, so Patricia gave us a nice testimonial about she was not volunteered. She was a poll worker, which I'd love for you to share kind of what a poll worker is and does. We have 200 women, mostly women, probably a few of our male friends on the call. And how can we help ensure that everyone has the ability to go to the polls if that's how they choose to exercise their right? You mentioned I've seen this democracy as a team sport. And you have a program that is kind of getting into a lot of our passion for sports. So if you could take a moment to explain that and help us understand how we can plug in.
Yes, I mean, yeah, notably partnerships and engagement are the key to success this year. Not just voters individually becoming aware of their rights and how to exercise them, but all of us working together to make sure the infrastructure is in place so that ballots can be received and returned on time and counted and go into an accurate reflection of our vote totals. So that said, the people that make up our election system, our election workers, our poll workers in the precincts, the workers who go behind the scenes to process and count those absentee or ballots sent through the mail, they truly are the nuts and bolts of the success of our democracy. And this is a year where we need more people to step up and serve in that regard. When you look at the success of our elections thus far, and how that's compared to other states, we've been successful in no small part because we have been able to fill every vacancy, even last minute vacancies, to ensure our polls are open on time and our ballots are able to be counted as efficiently as possible. But we need people to make that happen, especially now as we prepare for an election unlike any that we've ever experienced in this state. And by that, I mean, we will have turnout. We will continue to break turnout records. We will have more people voting in this election than have ever voted before in our state. And we need people to make sure those ballots are received, that they're counted, and that everything goes smoothly and securely. So please consider, being an engaged citizen this year means voting early and then volunteering on election day to make sure everyone else's votes get counted and cast. And you can sign up to be an election worker as one of democracy's MVPs at michigan.gov/democracymvp. We've already had close to 10,000 people sign up through that, but we need thousands more in order to fill all of the vacancies, not just in precincts, but again, counting and processing absentee ballots as they're mailed in. So there's so much work to be done this year. There's a role that everyone can play, and we hope you'll sign up to be a part of it and help us ensure our elections continue to be smooth, accessible, and secure.
And we'll definitely also include that in the post communications. We as Impact 100 have made a commitment that we will be putting the election day on our website as a gather and serve, which is when we go out in the community and take the opportunity to have impact through our actions. So we are hopeful that we can engage not only our members, but our members' families, friends, neighbors, strangers to be part of that team. I mean, we're fortunate to live in Michigan, which is a state that is going to matter even more than ever. And as we're looking, and I'm looking at time, but as we think about the 100th Amendment, all of the work and all of the struggle in that period of time for everyone, and we think about how we are living in Michigan, what is the parting words that you would say, words of wisdom, or kind of your last cheerleading hurrah for us?
That, we've got, close to just under 70 days until an election that will, decide the future of our state and our country. And there's work that all of us can do to ensure every vote is counted and every voice is heard. We saw in 2018 what can happen when women work together. And I'm so grateful to be part of a true partnership with our extraordinary Attorney General, who is as tough and smart, as brilliant as she is funny. And our really amazing leader with Governor Whitmer, who is focused on data-driven solutions and shows us all how to lead with grace and strength and dignity every day. So that's all. Like, we're all just working for you all, though. Like, that's a reflection of the work that you did, and we're proud to continue to charge forward. But our work isn't done. Your work isn't done. And over the next 70 days, we've got a lot of work to do simply to ensure that every vote is counted and every voice is heard in our state. So spread the word about how to vote. Get people, you can request to vote by mail right now at michigan.gov/vote. You can track your ballot there as well. You can check your registration. So spread the word, be an ambassador for our elections, be a voter educator in your community, and know that if you do so, you'll be playing a direct part in making sure our democracy is truly accessible and works for all.
Well, Secretary Benson, thank you. I am grateful that you spent time with us this morning. I personally, I will commit to being an MVP, and I will commit to getting lots of people to join us, as I know. And